Hi, everyone. We'll get started shortly. We're going to wait just another minute or two while other people are signing on. If you'd like to type in the question panel where you're dialing in from, we can see who's in our audience today. Okay, so we have people from Indianapolis and Stamford, Connecticut, Ohio, Buxton, Maine, Grand Prairie, Texas, Denver, Colorado, Wichita, Kansas, Salisbury, North Carolina, St. Louis, Norway, Nebraska, New York. It looks like we're covering the US and a little bit of Europe at this point, so that's great. Great audience for today. Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for another It's Learning webinar, this time on teaching critical thinking and web literacy. My name is Jill Davis, and I will be moderating today's presentation. Please ask questions at any time through the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will do our best to answer them during the Q&A at the end of today's presentation. We will also be sending out a link of this recording following the presentation. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter. Alan November is an international leader in education technology and was named one of USA's 15 most influential thinkers of the decade by Tech and Learning magazine. Alan's most recent book, Who Owns the Learning, made the Education New York Times bestseller list. Alan has worked with schools and universities in 40 countries to improve learning through innovative practice. He leads the globally acclaimed Building Learning Communities Conference. I will now turn things over to Alan.
Thanks, Jill.
You're welcome.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to, So first of all, I want to say a shout out for the Boston Celtics. And after that, we can get on with the more important things. So I'm convinced that web literacy may be the single most important opportunity that we can focus on with technology. It also, unfortunately, may be our weakest link of all, that sometimes with technology there's unintended consequences, and I think a general lack of student skill with understanding how to validate whether something's true or false and do sophisticated search may actually be leading to a lowering of critical thinking, and even for some students, encouraging even somewhat lazy habits. I want to be wrong on that. I would hate to think technology leads to any negative consequences, but this may be one of the more serious ones. So what I'd like to do is start with a poll. Jill, do the folks at home see this poll at the moment? Oh, there we go, thanks. So if you guys could just check off, I'm just curious how active your discussion is up till now on web literacy. We'll give a minute or less for this. While you're filling out the poll, I'm just convinced that teachers are more important than ever, that at a time when we've lost control of the sources of information students access, we really need to teach critical thinking. So I think we can go ahead, Jill, and take a look at the results. Wow, so it is being discussed. All good. Yeah, we could go to the, let's see, to the next one. we'll take the poll on what folks believe their students understand. So if you were to ask your students, do you know how to use Google? What percentage of your students would say yes? What do you think kids think about their own skill set? And that's probably enough time for that one, Jill. That's a quick one. So 100%. Wow, that's quite the range. I'm surprised. I'm going to. That's interesting because I've asked students all over the world if they know how to use Google. I've never had a student say no. So I'm intrigued that it's only 55%. Folks on the webinar must be teaching critical thinking. We'll take this poll again at the end and see what people think. All right, so off we go. Let's get into it. And Jill, if you could help me push the slides, I just need some help in the next slide. Jill, I don't know if you're there, but get rid of that one, and the next one, and the next one. Okay, let's start with what is the purpose of Google. So for those of you at home, you might enjoy this search. Type in, are cats better than dogs? And if you have a friend, have the friend type in, are dogs better than cats? And then look at each other's screens. For those of you who think, are cats better than dogs? Google's going to tell you by asking the question in exactly that way that cats are better than dogs every time as you go down the results. And if you wrote a dog is better than cats, Google will tell you every time that dogs are better than cats. So both of those things cannot be true at the same time. And sometimes this does surprise students. And I would suggest that you try to search with students and ask them what's going on. Or maybe even before that, you can ask them what's the purpose of Google? Because many students will say it gives you the best information. It tries to find good sources, but that's not true. What is true is that Google tries to figure out, what do you want to hear? What are you predisposed to believe? And it tries to give you what you want to hear. Now, this would drive any librarian crazy if this were the way libraries were set up, because we don't send kids to the library to reinforce their existing beliefs. And yet, that's exactly what's happening, possibly every time students use Google, unless they understand how to design objective searches. If you want, we can come back to this at the end and figure out, what if you wanted a balanced search? What would you type in? But this is an amazing exercise if you want to give students an aha moment that Google, in fact, feeds your own worldview. So Jill, if you go on the next slide, that'd be great. And then there's this incredible TED Talk. I would urge you all to look at Ellie Pariser's The Filter Bubble. He does an amazingly good job showing that not only is Google out to understand what you want, but it's also personalizing for each individual, giving even more precise, accurate response to what you want, because it tracks your searches over time, learns about you in other ways, and tries to really do this thing called personalized search. So if you've never seen an analysis of that, urge you to take a look at that TED Talk. Okay, next slide, Jill. So there's three things I want to kind of focus on today. I think we should teach students how to find primary sources, how to get global perspective, and how to find the most knowledgeable information on the web possible. So only three things today, but I think these three things are very strategic. Next slide, Jill. So last week, I was at an independent school, and I showed kids some fake news and some other things that weren't real. And I'm not making this up. An 8th grade student was horrified. And she said, how's that possible that anyone, anywhere in the world, would put something on the internet that was not true? So she was horrified, and I was terrified. It just didn't occur to me that an 8th grader would have gone through life using Google almost every day and not be aware of this. So it made me think that maybe what we ought to do on purpose is show students things that are not true. This was not the case when I was teaching before the internet. I would just tell my students everything's true. The whole year is true. I never taught them to question. I never showed them things that weren't true. I told them every encyclopedia article is true. The textbooks are true. Every book in the library is true. But now I don't think that is such a good idea. I think we really ought to show students some things that aren't true in every subject we teach. And I think we should even brainstorm, why do people do this? What are all the different reasons that people would have? When I started listing reasons for this girl, and she just couldn't believe it, that there were that many reasons. If you want, we can go back to that, but I imagine people on this call are fully aware of all the different reasons people would have, but she was not. So that concerned me. Maybe it's only that one girl in that one school, but I had a feeling it was just about every student. Okay, next slide, Jill. So this is a real photograph. You can get this photograph if you type in ear, mouse, and BBC. And you will see an article on the BBC website that explains that the ear grew, scientists grew the ear on the back of this mouse. And what I like to do is show students competing points of view on the web at the same time. So if you do another search just on ear mouse, you'll come to Wikipedia. And when you get to Wikipedia, it explains that the ear looks like it grew, but it actually was a form shaped into an ear first and then implanted under the skin. So you have these different verbs that explain how the ear got in the back of the mouse. You have the BBC version, it grew, and the Wikipedia version, implanted. So then, of course, what I like to do is say to students, okay, find the primary source and see what you can do. Now, what's fascinating is a lot of kids will just type, give me the primary source. They don't have an actual strategy for doing it. So I want to work on strategies. So next slide, Jill. So the first thing that makes sense to me, and you'll have to share if you have a different strategy for finding primary source, is to figure out the author. And in this case, both articles clearly identify the author as a Dr. Vacanti. So we know a critical piece of the mystery, how to get primary source. And then, like Sherlock Holmes, because I kind of think of this as being a web detective, you just want to put down the facts. So we only know two things. We only know it's an ear, and we only know it's a mouse. We don't want to ask, did it grow? And we don't want to ask if it was implanted, because that's like the cats and dogs problem. So we want to be very objective, no adverbs, no verbs, no articles, just facts. And then I decided that the location would also be critical, some lab where this was done. And if you scan the articles, you can quickly see that 3 universities are mentioned: a Harvard Teaching Hospital, UMass Medical School, and MIT. So I put together Vacanti, ear mouse, site : mit.edu. For those of you who've never seen the site command, Google has 16 words like site that are called operators. that give you incredible control over the precision results of your search. And I love Cite. I use this all the time. So as long as you find the domain name of MIT, which is mit.edu, and you put it at the end of the site with the colon, then you're commanding Google only to give you MIT content. And you quickly can read the results when you do that search, and you find out that it was implanted. It did not grow out of the back of the mouse. So in this case, Wikipedia is correct, and BBC is at least sensational, possibly misleading. And a lot of students are surprised by this, that, you know, if you ask them in advance, which one do you think is true, the BBC or Wikipedia? Majority of students, in my experience, have told me, well, the BBC must be correct. And I'll say, why? And they'll say, well, our teachers told us we can't trust Wikipedia. So I would advise that we stop doing that. Or let's teach students to question everything. I mean, I'm fine with questioning Wikipedia, but I think we should also teach students to question the BBC. It turns out that the error rate in so-called gold standards, you know, encyclopedias and things like the BBC are actually much higher than we might suspect. So I'm concerned that some students just automatically would discount Wikipedia. I actually think Wikipedia is amazing, and that we ought to teach students how to use it really, really well. If you did a quick search, you'll discover that the Harvard Medical School teaches all their students to use Wikipedia just to see what the crowdsourcing is saying about different diagnostics and response, you know, to disease. So if doctors at the Harvard Medical School are learning Wikipedia and how to use it well, I think we should teach students to do the same thing. By the way, it's also fascinating to me that when I ask students to explain why Wikipedia showed up at the top of a search, if you type in ear mouse, probably anywhere you are, you could do that now. And I bet you will find Wikipedia at the top of your search. And a lot of kids just make stuff up. They say it's the most updated, the best encyclopedia in the world, most popular, most accessed. And actually, none of those things are true. It has to do with the fact that the web address has at least one of the words you use in the search. So I'm concerned that students who only look at the top screen, and that's what our data shows us, don't even understand why data is in the top screen. You might want to ask your students this and see if they understand the algorithm and why results flow out of Google the way they do. All right, so this is an idea that you would take two sources of various descriptions. They both cannot be completely true, and design those kinds of activities across the curriculum and challenge students to develop strategies to really figure out how do you validate and verify whether something is true or false. All right, Jill, we can go on. So I wish I was wrong on this. I really want to be wrong. You'll have to tell me if I'm wrong. But I've watched a lot of kids, and a lot of kids' search strategy is literally to take the name of their teacher's assignment and type it word for word. Everyone knows that teachers' assignments were not designed to be search strategies. They're just the title of an assignment. And I think what we ought to do is teach kids what not to do. And that would be one of the things we should teach students is your assignment title probably wasn't designed to be a search. In fact, it's probable that most of the assignments you get today were actually originally written before the internet was even invented. So I would be very concerned about that. In another webinar, we should talk about redesigning assignments to take power of the web. I'm concerned that we're giving a lot of old work with an amazing access to information in the world. And maybe we can talk about that at the end if we have time. So you may want to watch to see if your students are typing in the name of your assignments word for word. All right, Jill, we can go on. So here's an example. It's a classic one. I've written about this a long time ago. I asked students in a very high-performing high school, these were juniors in honors classes, name a time you used Google and you got an A. And the first student volunteered that he got an A on his assignment called the Iranian hostage crisis. And of course, he typed it in word for word. When you do that, Iranian hostage crisis, you will not get any sources from Iran. You will only get Western sources for a variety of reasons. And, you know, in the old days, this is an example, in the old days before the internet, I suppose we could defend that we were giving A's to students who were only writing from one point of view. Certainly, there were no books in the library from Iran. You could never get an Iranian point of view before the web. But today you can. And that's the thing. I think we should have made it clear to students that in order to do this assignment well in the age of the internet, it's required that they get sources from Iran and not only Western sources. So in some ways, and I hope this does not sound too critical, but I would hate to think that we're actually rewarding students with grades on traditional assignments where they could have done much better in the age of the internet with higher expectation. So you can see what I've done in the search. You know, you type in site:/IR. This is similar to mit.edu. IR is the country code for Iran. So the site command not only limits to domain names, but it also limits to a country as long as you have the right country code. And then what's interesting is I asked the student if he could get to Iran, and he said yes. And the student typed in Iranian sources. Student, and of course, if you type in Iranian sources, you can type in any country's sources if you want. Essentially, on any search, you probably won't get any country if you happen to be in the United States on this webinar. And but he didn't even realize he wasn't getting Iranian sources. So I had to show him how to look up the country code and type in site:/IR. And then I said, what's the rest of the search? And he types in Iranian hostage crisis. And I said, you know, it's possible the Iranians didn't call it the Iranian hostage crisis. And I showed him how to find what the Iranians called it, and they called it conquest of the American spy net. So this poor boy did not understand the mechanics, which would be, you know, site:/IR. And then he did not understand as well the more creative task to figure out, well, maybe I need to change the search from what my teacher called it to what the Iranians called it if I want to get, you know, a different point of view. So I'm convinced that this boy would not have done this on his own. And indeed, I don't know. In this one school I was visiting, I can tell you, I don't think one student understood what I'm explaining right now. And again, I want to be wrong, but that was my experience. There was just no capacity for students to understand how to get global perspective. And that does concern me. You'll have to let me know if that concerns you. All right, Jill, we can go on. So last week, I ran into this assignment. The teacher asked students about the impact of mining on the environment. And students were typing in, you know, once again, impact of mining on the environment, getting all kinds of various quality results, which concerned me. Mixed in were some good results, but the students couldn't distinguish. And so I thought, in this time, what we'll try to do is teach students to find who are the experts, who really knows about mining. And so one student said, well, the miners do. We should search on what miners think about the environment. And I said, I don't know if miners would be open-minded about the impact of what they do on the environment. They might know, but there might be other organizations that are better than trying to find miners who are telling us whether their own work impacts the environment. That was the first student response. So Jill, let's go on to the next slide. So I'll give you a moment to design the search. And wherever you are, think about your local situation. I happened to be in Australia last week, so I'll show you what I did in Australia. It's somewhat specific, I believe, to your region of the world. But I'll give you a moment. Design a search that you think will get expert review of the impact of mining on the environment. Okay, so we'll go on. Jill, if you could show what I did. And I'm not saying what I did is the only way to do it, but what I sorted out is that government agencies in Australia are gov.au. That's the extension of lots of government agencies in that country. So I typed in site:/gov.au because I wanted to see, I didn't know, I wanted to see if Australia had any official government agencies dealing with mines and the impact of mines. And when you do that, you only get government agencies, and there two of them popped up that were amazing about the impact of mining on the environment: Department of Mines and Petroleum and the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy. And they had incredible scientific reports on the impact. And what I realized is there probably wasn't a student in the room. I know this sounds very critical, but there wasn't a student in the room, and this was a top performing independent school that I absolutely love, preparing students in every other way, mathematics and writing, but just not building capacity for kids to understand the web and to find expert content on a relatively straightforward assignment. All right, let's go on next slide, Jill, please. So I'm convinced, as I realized that the naivete of students and the lack of what we could call, the mechanics, which search tool do I use to get the precision I need, and the lack of critical thinking, for example, who do I look for and what would the Iranians call this, and so forth, that teachers are needed more than ever. And I'm going to suggest, there are these three things that we need to teach kids in order to do good search. We've got to teach children how to brainstorm questions before they touch Google. We should tell them to shut their screens and think of all the questions they need to ask in order to get good quality information. So there's this warm-up, preliminary brainstorming of questions. Maybe the teacher can lead this, because I don't think giving assignments and just saying go is sufficient, nor do I think only giving students an orientation in the library, while it is important, is sufficient. I think we need to do this across the curriculum, from early elementary all the way through, as we give assignments. Certainly the mechanics of search are important, and once you generate your questions, then there's different strategies, because if you're going to do something like, are cats better than dogs, then you better automatically do, are dogs better than cats? And that there are these, continuous changes in the design of the search to see and compare results. And I'm not sure that a lot of students are set up to understand how to compare results and to see how wildly different they are just by changing one word in a search. So these are just three suggestions. And off we go, Jill. We can move on. So there's a bunch of references that I think are just basic in terms of the mechanics. One is the Wayback Machine. Again, very few students that I've ever met have ever been asked to use the Wayback Machine. In case you don't know about the Wayback Machine, it's at archive.org, and the basic concept is starting in about 94 and 95, a couple of guys in San Francisco decided the web was going to be important, and they basically backed it all up every day. Depending on the website, it's amazing. The searches you can do in the Wayback Machine to find content that no longer exists. For example, again, if you want to see just how scientific policy changes over time, you could go to the EPA.gov website in the Wayback Machine over the last, say, 8 years, and just look for any reference to climate change. And you'll notice at some point recently, it just all disappeared. And it's interesting to teach kids to understand the change in ideas over time. Or if you click on a link while you're reading an article, and this has happened to me in my doctoral classes, my doctoral students would come to me and they'd say, Alan, you've got these assignments for us, and there's some links in some of the assignments on the web, and those links no longer work, so we couldn't do the work. And I would just look at my doctoral students and say, do you understand the Wayback Machine? You just take the web address and you pop it in the Wayback Machine, and now you got it. So you shouldn't be stumped when you click on a link and you can't get it. We have a tool for that. But I think to a person, all of my doctoral students didn't know how to do that. And those are superintendents and principals and curriculum directors. They're all administrators. And to me, that's just basic, that you just understand. It's like knowing there's a dictionary or a thesaurus. Everyone just has to know there's a Wayback Machine. Wolfram Alpha, it's a computational knowledge engine. It's absolutely amazing. I'm going to show you some things in Wolfram Alpha in a little bit. Let me just put that aside for now. The list of country codes, absolutely essential. I think every student should bookmark the Wayback Machine, and every student should bookmark a list of country codes so that it's immediate to them. They're never stumped again, and they always can get global perspective. But again, very few students seem to have these two things bookmarked or even know about them, which is more concerning to me. And finally, I think we should also bookmark the who is. If you typed in, whois.com, you'd see a database where you can type in a web address and find out who owns it. It doesn't always work because sometimes you can get a company to register a website for you, but it's pretty good. And it's amazing when you ask kids, who put that up on the internet? And they stare at the web page trying to figure out, where is it, like a book, in a title page, but it may or may not be there. If it's not there, you clearly can go to who is and try to find it that way. So I'm just concerned that the general basics that could easily be bookmarks for every student, one click away, is not happening. And I don't know how you could possibly use the web well without reference tools like these. I just don't understand how that'd be possible. All right, Jill, we'll go one more. So what you're looking at here, I typed in to Wolfram Alpha Macbeth. I just wanted to search for Macbeth. And it gives me a whole bunch of stuff I don't need. But toward the bottom of the search page, you get this. And this is, as it says, a dialogue timeline. So all those blue dashes you see along those lines next to the major characters are when that character is on stage. So no human being could really generate this without tremendous amount of work and time. Wolfram Alpha can read Macbeth in half a second and give you data that you would probably never see otherwise, which is why I like Wolfram Alpha. It just turns lots of things into data. In fact, you could type my name, your name, into Wolfram Alpha. If I type Alan into Wolfram Alpha, I see this incredible chart of how many people are named Alan each year since the 1800s. And you show that to kids, they go crazy. They want to type their name and see the chart, how many people have the same name. And then you can start doing math. You can start doing slope and calculus and all kinds of fun stuff because your name has turned into data. So I love Wolfram Alpha because it just shows you stuff you ordinarily could never find. But yet again, lots of kids don't know how to use it, or they've never been asked to use it. They might think it's only for math because it'll solve basically any equation and show you every step, and lots of things in chemistry and physics and economics and so forth. So I just think it's important to teach kids, when do I use a computational knowledge engine and when do I use Google? You got to know, like the dictionary and the thesaurus. The other thing I like about what we're looking at here is, if I were going to teach Macbeth, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm not an English teacher, but I've read the research, and the research says that you ought to get kids to ask questions before you do something like read a play. So their mind is ready, they're revved up and they're thinking. So consider this, that you give this chart to students before they read the play, and you just ask them to look at the patterns and generate questions out of the patterns. So you can see Malcolm and Macduff, they roughly show up on stage at the same time. And you can see that there are moments when Macbeth is on stage and nobody else is on stage. And Banquo just stops coming, right? So you can get kids to ask some pretty interesting questions just by showing them patterns like this, so that their mind is churning with ideas before they start reading Macbeth. And then, in fact, if you have this whole class going, asking questions, you could sort the questions and give it to all the students and have them answer their own questions. In fact, I would bet that 15, 20 minutes, you could get students to ask most of the most interesting questions about Macbeth without having to read it, as long as you can show them patterns like this one. So I love Wolfram Alpha for generating patterns like this. All right, Jill, we can go on. So I'm going to ask the same question one more time. Do you think your students understand Google and general search? So I guess I'm looking for, how many of you feel confident that your students know everything I know? So if they know everything I know that I've just shared, then you would check off 100%. Okay, let's take a look, Jill, at what we've got. 100% is 1%. So that's an interesting comparison with the earlier result of the same poll, roughly, where those aren't the numbers. And so given the earlier poll and this poll, it looks like the overwhelming majority of you believe that most of your students don't really know how to use Google. If that's the case, I would make this the #1 priority of using technology. My sense is the real revolution is not technology, it's information and communication. That we're in an amazing information revolution. We don't call it that, we tend to call it technology, but my own bias is we're in an information revolution. And if you don't know how to get the right information at the right time, whether, or even know how to validate, then it doesn't matter how smart you are or how much you've memorized. You could really be stuck into a very biased point of view if you don't understand how information is delivered to you. So I'm fascinated by the difference in the two poles. Maybe we could get some people to comment on that in terms of a question or a comment, which I'm looking forward to. All right, Jill, we can go on. So a couple of resources for you. I've written a lot on, you go to November Learning and click on this web address. You'll see lots of articles and examples. I'm just deeply, deeply concerned about this topic. You probably want to go to the Google Operator Guide. You can Google that and to see the 16 commands like cite that give you incredible precision over your search. It's just another reference tool. All kids should bookmark that one as well. The Google Operator Guide website explaining those operators. And then there's Power Search with Google. Google has a couple of free online courses. Type in Power Search with Google, you'll find those. And for those of you who can take these online self-directed classes, that'll at least get you started in thinking about the algorithm and how to design search. Okay, go on. So next steps, I think we really ought to show students what's happening with the filter bubble. I think we definitely should show students misleading content from the time they're young. I think we may even want to have kids brainstorm why anyone would put up false information, so it's in the forefront of their thinking. I think we should tell students to design good searches, you don't just throw words up. You stop and think, and you generate questions, and depending on whether you need expertise or global perspective or a primary source, different questions. And that's where teachers really are important, is to help students learn how to ask important questions like that. And then just, critical thinking on the web has to do with not only the mechanics, grammar and syntax, but it has to do with, when do I have to completely ignore my teacher's assignment title and get something like Conquest American Spy Den, so kids are actually rejecting what's in front of them and thinking about what they're not even thinking about. That then you're really onto something. So I hope that was good enough to criticize. I look forward to some of your questions. I think that's it for my slides, right, Jill? What's the next one?
Yes. Thank you, Alan, for all the great information and insights that you shared with us today. I know we have several questions to get to in the Q&A, but I would like to take just a minute to share some details about It's Learning and how it ties into today's topic. We've been talking about the importance of bringing web literacy into the curriculum for all students, K through 12. And with an enterprise level LMS like It's Learning, the process of rolling out new curricula, such as that around web literacy and critical thinking, is simplified and streamlined. Teachers, students, parents, and administrators can all work and collaborate in It's Learning with a single sign-on to social media, tools like G Suite and Microsoft, and publisher and teacher created content to deliver a high quality, personalized learning experience for students. Our philosophy, It's Learning, is designed by educators specifically for the way today's K-12 students live and learn. We are committed to supporting the unique, ever-changing needs of each student by providing resources to better personalize learning, increase communication, and facilitate collaboration. So you will also notice that there are 2 resources available for download in the GoToWebinar console. One covers the various applications, systems, and tools It's Learning integrates with, and the other explains how It's Learning makes curriculum planning easier for teachers while also improving student engagement. If you would like access to more resources or to learn more about our award-winning LMS, visit itslearning.com. And now I would like to turn to the question and answer session. So we did have a few questions for you, Alan, as well as some comments and thank yous from the audience in terms of the resources that you shared. So it sounds like the information is going to be very helpful to our audience. We did get a question from Susie, and it's relating to the polls that we took around Google and whether students know how to use them. And she was curious as to what you would think teachers would say as to their knowledge around using Google.
Yeah.
Do we feel that teachers feel that they know how to use Google correctly?
Well, my sense is that there's probably not a lot of space between what students know and what teachers know. And probably the same would be true where teachers would, if you ask teachers, you know, use Google, I can only imagine many would say yes, because I have done that. And then you start showing them how this thing works, and you can just watch, you know, the deer in the headlight look turn into, okay, let's get going on this. So I also know that Stanford came out with a study. We should get this on a slide. I'm sorry I didn't. They researched 7,800 students last year to sort out whether they could validate something true or false on the internet. They discovered that the best any group did was at Stanford itself, where only 30% of students could do that. For middle school students, it dropped to 10%. So, and this is nationwide. These 8,000 students represented schools and universities coast to coast. So I wrote to Sam Weinstein, who's the chief research scientist on this, and he told me that now they're doing another study of professors and teachers, and he wouldn't give me the data, but he said, his words, "It's not pretty." So the answer to the question is probably the same as the students.
Okay, great. I have a similar question here from Anne, and she is making a comment. She says, teachers also need fairly continuous reminders about how important it is to model, question, and lead students through these types of discussions as the years pass. So there's this thought that, you know, as students are moving from kindergarten into middle school and high school, to just keep the conversation going and keep modeling for students.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. You know, I was a teacher for 12 years. It's so caught up in covering the curriculum, correcting papers, and responding to every student's need. You can only be exhausted at the end of the week. And so you have to feel for teachers now, the extra burden of learning how to be web literate and building that capacity within a classroom where you have no time must be stressful. And I think we need to acknowledge that it's stressful for many teachers, and hopefully not blame them, but give them as much support as possible. So I agree. Any gentle reminders, I think, would be wonderful.
Great. And Alan, you alluded to another topic that you wanted to touch on briefly as well, and that's how might we redesign assignments to harness the power that's available now in terms of the power and the breadth of the information that's available on the internet. I didn't know if you wanted to spend a few minutes touching on that.
Yeah, I'd love to do that, Jill. Thanks. Well, let's just go back to the assignment on the Iranian hostage crisis. My sense is when the teacher gave it, and I'm just guessing, that he did not tell students that they would have to get sources from Iran, nor did he provide the two-letter country code, nor did he probably mention the site command, and so forth and so on. So if in an ideal world, we would take some time in the summer, go over all the assignments we give kids, you know, some team of people headed up by librarians or people who really know this stuff. And we would build in specific directions of web literacy within the assignments. And then I would have some level of confidence that students are really building this capacity. So step one, Jill, is to, like the gold mine one, same thing. Take a look at government, gov.au. I don't think we need to, catch kids. I think up front, when we give an assignment, we should be telling kids how to find the best information in the world. So that's just one aspect. So why don't we stop there for now?
Yeah, that's great, Alan. I'm also seeing a comment here from Vanessa. She says, great information. I cannot wait to plan a PD for teachers and then with students around this information. So this is kind of another idea, is to start with professional development for teachers and then sort of design the curriculum for students. So what are your thoughts on that approach?
Yeah, I'm going to say something very unlike me, very controversial. I think we should teach students first. I know that sounds really weird, but I do this a lot. I think teachers should watch kids. So the urgency for a teacher to learn something might have to do with how serious a teacher believes the problem to be. And if teachers think kids know how to use Google, then the staff development where they come to learn how to use Google might not be taken too seriously. But if you could get teachers to watch kids, even bring kids into the workshop and give them examples of search to do, top students, middle students, all kinds of kids if you can, at least 3 or 4, and kids who are maybe in the drama department who are willing to be in public. And then teachers can watch kids typically fall apart pretty quickly. And kids then say, how did I not know this? I've been doing assignments. How did I get to high school and not know this? And that, I think, is a really nice wake-up call to create a sense of urgency for teachers in your workshops. So I would have teachers watch kids first and then go to the workshop. In fact, bring the kids to the workshop with the teachers, because if kids are there at the same time, if you can pull this off, if you have both teachers and kids in the workshop, my sense is kids will ask really interesting questions. They will practice. They can go back to class with their teacher to help other kids learn this stuff. So in the ideal world, you start with kids stay. It's a partnership in the staff development of teacher and kid.
Yeah, I really like that idea in terms of involving students and teachers in the workshop. That's great.
That's
We
more
have
fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
We have a comment here from Anne, and she says part of the difficulty is spiraling and repetition. We have most of your ideas through our tech curriculum map, but students get lazy and revert to old habits across the grades. So how would do you have any suggestions as to how to tackle that issue?
I have seen that. In fact, I have taught kids who absolutely don't know, and they just don't care. It's so easy to throw words up into a search, and Google rewards you with immediate results. So it's actually feeding bad habits, that you're really fighting the tide on this. So really interesting observation. Sometimes what I'll do with both teachers and students, depending on the age of the student, you got to be very delicate about this, is I'll give them a real problem in life, such as somebody, gets a diagnosis of breast cancer, and they know that you know how to use the internet, smart kid, and you have to help um, somebody in your family get the best information in the world on the most recent treatment of something like breast cancer. If you can pull that off in a delicate way, that kind of problem with kids, you can just watch them get serious and realize, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to use this out of school, and it's going to be really important. So maybe I should learn this stuff. Now, getting them to use it, the next month, I understand is another problem, but sometimes I will, pepper in these really serious life problems to get students to kind of wake up. Um, the other thing I deeply believe in, and this has to do with assignment design, is I think more and more I love Genius Hour. I love the whole concept of kids designing their own problems, brainstorming and designing problems. And I think if students own the design of the problem, I know we can't do this all the time, but I think we can do it more than we currently generally do. Then I'm hopeful that that sense of ownership of the design of the problem will lead to more responsibility in finding the best information, but we'll never get there. I don't think, we can convince every student every time to be absolutely disciplined and creative in their search. We'll just do the best we can.
Okay, thank you again, Alan. It looks like we are nearing the top of the hour, so we will need to wrap up the Q&A. I want to thank everyone for listening and for your participation during today's webinar. Thank you again to Alan for sharing his expertise with us today. There will be a few follow-up questions for you at the end, and we will send you a link to the recording of today's presentation. For more information on It's Learning, please visit itslearning.com. Have a great day.
Jill? Are you still there, Jill?